Ukraine's President Volodymr Zelenskyy has dismissed comments from Russian President Vladimir Putin that he is ready for talks to end the war in Ukraine, calling it, quote, manipulation. Putin gave an interview to state TV praising U.S. President Donald Trump. He also said he and Trump had a pragmatic and trusting relationship and suggested they should meet to discuss ending the Ukraine war. Meanwhile, the U.S. is halting foreign aid to almost all countries for 90 days. According to a leaked internal memo from the U.S. State Department, only two countries, Israel and Egypt, are exempt from the freeze. Let's get more from DW correspondent Nick Connolly in Kyiv. Nick, thanks for joining us. So Ukraine is dependent on military aid from the U.S. Has this move from the State Department come as a surprise to the government in Kyiv?
I think it was expected, and we definitely saw the Biden administration sending huge volumes of aid in the last couple of months to give Ukraine some kind of grace period, some kind of supplies to get it through the initial months of the Trump administration. But at least based on what's happening today, we've heard from President Zelenskyy saying he hasn't seen any reduction in military aid so far. He definitely made that distinction between military and kind of civilian programs there. I think the fact is we just don't know how this is going to pan out. There's a real sense that even the US government doesn't understand how to interpret these orders and what exactly this concerns, if this is just about new programs or about ones that have already been planned, where the money's already been assigned, if these are going to be affected too. But certainly the US is the top partner when it comes to weapons and basically irreplaceable when it comes to weapon supplies for Ukraine.
I realize this is really early days into the U.S. presidency, but with that unpredictability from President Trump, could Kyiv turn its eyes towards Europe more, hoping to see an increase in support, both financial and military, from allies?
Well, that's definitely the obvious alternative, and we saw Volodymyr Zelenskyy give a pretty pugnacious speech at Davos just this past week, where he was saying that it wasn't just a case of Europe needing to do more for Ukraine in its own interest, but he's also saying that Europe was threatened with basically becoming irrelevant, that maybe, Russia, the US, China would decide what happens here in Ukraine, and, Europe, not let alone Ukraine, wouldn't be asked. So he was trying to make this a bigger thing and also say that Ukraine is potentially part of the answer, that Ukraine is a country that has obviously hugely grown its military, has come up with lots of new military technology, can be an example essentially for other European countries that are now having to basically work out how to defend themselves. Whether or not Europe will be able to really fill that gap for now is unclear. Definitely in terms of kind of finance, that is a possibility. But in terms of military hardware, it really has been difficult, even though Europe has increased its production. They just don't have the same stockpiles and the same capacity that the Americans do.
Now, Putin was very complimentary about Trump, flattering Trump. Is there a sense in Ukraine that Zelenskyy and others need to vie for Trump's support?
Definitely. I think the scene that everyone remembers here in Ukraine was from autumn of last year when Zelenskyy met Trump before the election, was trying to kind of shore up ties with him. And they went to come to talk to the press, and you could tell it was a bit nervous. And Trump said that he had great ties to Zelenskyy, that they got on well, but also that he got on well with Putin. Zelenskyy interrupted him and said, I hope we can be clear here that relations with Ukraine are better than those with Russia. Trump didn't really want to give him that. So there is a real nervousness, and we've seen Zelenskyy change his tone, change his language, effusively praise Trump and his family after the election win, talk about Europe needing to spend 5% of GDP on defense. That was a kind of Trump demand in recent weeks, something that Zelenskyy has repeated. So he's definitely trying to position himself as someone who is on the same page as the Trump administration, someone who's going to represent US interests in Europe. And he's obviously worried of a kind of Putin-Trump meeting and Putin basically getting the best of Trump. So it's a real worry.
Nick Connolly in Kyiv, thank you so much.